So if you're on a set and you want to connect this to this over a distance, you're going to need a few things. Lots of giant HDMI cables, HDMI adapters, HDMI couplers, and of course, plenty of gaff tape to make sure that nobody trips and ends up suing you. Or you could just use something like this. Wireless video is a convenient thing to have on set, but sometimes it's also a necessity. So if you're doing any sort of wireless focus work, if you're using a steadicam or a gimbal, or if you just need to provide your client with a monitor that's some distance away from the camera, because they tend to like to see what's being shot. So a long time ago, I actually built my own wireless HDMI system using consumer grade parts and electronics, and it worked pretty well for most things. The signal wasn't the strongest, the range wasn't necessarily the farthest, and it definitely had some latency issues, but it really got the job done for what I needed at that time. But man, that video is old and doesn't look awesome. But recently, the fine people over at Hollyland contacted me and asked if I would want to take a look at their new Mars 300 wireless HDMI video system. Now we have our wireless monitor that we can hand to clients or directors. Yes, please. So I do want to start off by saying that the people over at Hollyland did send this to me to check out, but this video is not sponsored and I don't have to say nice things. If there's something that I don't like, I'm definitely going to tell you about it. That being out of the way, let's take a look at the Mars 300. So in the box, this is everything that comes with the Mars 300 system. It's got a single receiver and a single transmitter and a few mounting and power options. So each of the units can be mounted in a few different ways. They have this screw fitting plate along with a cold shoe adapter that you can use to mount it. And they each also have a 1/4-20 thread at the bottom. Now, one thing I do wish is that this set came with 2 pairs of the mounting plate and the cold shoe adapter, because right now I have to choose whether I want to mount that on my receiver or if I want to mount it on my transmitter. I kind of wish I could put it on both. So when it comes to actually powering the system, you've also got a few options. There is an NPF Sony style plate on both the transmitter and the receiver, so you can power them that way. But they both also have the option of powering through a DC barrel connector here. And this barrel connector can actually run between 6 and 16 volts, meaning it needs a little bit more power than a USB battery bank can provide at 5 volts. You can't run it off of that. But taking up to 16 volts means that you could power this off of a DTAP or Pro battery. Now, they don't include a cable from DC to DTAP, but I plan on making my own cables later so that I can actually power this off of a DTAP battery. One thing I do like about this DC jack is that it is threaded, so it's locking. So when you get your connector in, you can thread lock it into place and you know that it's not going to come out. Now, one thing to note is that the Mars 300 is an HDMI only system, so if you want to use it with cameras that output SDI, you're going to have to go to one of their higher end models. But that being said, this is actually pretty cool because it's a dual HDMI system. What that means is that the transmitter actually has HDMI loop through, and the receiver actually has dual HDMI outputs. What this means is that if you have your transmitter on your camera, you can run your HDMI signal into it to be transmitted, but then you can also still run a signal to a monitor that you might have mounted on your camera rig. What that means for the receiver is that you can actually send the signal that comes into it out to 2 separate displays. So that's actually something that you usually see in more expensive versions of wireless systems. So the range of this system is claimed to be about 300 feet line of sight, hence Mars 300. Now, I actually took it out and tested it in my neighborhood, and I was able to get almost 600 feet before I got it to cut out. Granted, this was in ideal circumstances. I was outdoors, there were no obstructions, I had line of sight, so your performance range is going to vary depending on those factors. If you're indoors, if you're going from room to room or across different floors, if you're outdoors and you don't have line of sight or there are some obstructions in the way, maybe some metal structures, your performance is going to vary. But it's basically rated for 300 feet line of sight best conditions. One nice thing that they do have though is there is actually an indicator light that will start blinking when your signal is starting to get weak, so it gives you a little bit of a heads up before it actually cuts out. So this system is capable of handling frame rates and resolutions of up to 1080p 60 frames per second. So you're not going to get 4K, but that's all right. So as long as you're feeding a signal to the transmitter that's 1080p 60 or below, it's going to be able to recognize the signal and send it wirelessly over to your receiver and whatever you're using to monitor. So I get asked all the time on my old wireless video, what cameras is this compatible with? So what it boils down to is that wireless HDMI is going to be compatible with any camera that can give it an appropriate signal. So if your camera can output 1080p 60 or less, it's going to work with this. On top of that, if your camera can output clean HDMI without any of the overlays, then you're going to get a clean HDMI signal. It's only going to transmit whatever your camera gives to it. So it's really on your camera end if it's going to be what you're looking for. Now, another consideration with wireless video systems of any kind is going to be latency, the delay in the image transmission itself. This can be especially important if you're going to be pulling focus wirelessly from that monitor, because any delay means that you could be delayed in your actions and you could actually be missing focus by a half a second, or more, depending on how bad the latency is. Now, there is some inherent latency and delay in HDMI video as it is, but I ran the test with my Panasonic GH5 shooting at 30 frames per second, and I found that we had a latency of about 11 frames. And when I slow it down to about 50% in a 30p timeline, you can definitely see that we are lagging behind. Now, it is only 11 out of 30 frames, so we're looking at about a third of a second of latency. So it's really up to you if that's something that you can live with, or if you want to get even shorter latency, you're probably going to have to move into SDI, and you're probably going to have to move into much more expensive models. So I tried doing some testing to see what the battery life was on these units, but I got a little bit impatient. I actually ran the system on this small NPF battery for several hours, and it didn't die. According to their website, they say a fully charged NPF 970 battery should run the system for about 5 hours. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you are running solely on battery, you're going to need one battery for your transmitter, and you're also going to need a second battery for your receiver. So one thing that they didn't include that I kind of wish they had found a way to do is there's no battery life indicators on either of the units, and I kind of wish there was one so that you could keep a close eye on your battery life, but they do seem to run for a pretty good long time on battery. And now for the price. The Mars 300 system comes in at $499 currently. So it's not necessarily cheap, but it's definitely affordable when you compare it to some other companies and some other systems that are out there. While they do technically list this in their consumer category on their website, I do see it as being a handy tool within the budget of most indie filmmakers if you need wireless video. I actually plan on taking this system and using it to replace and upgrade my old director's monitor that I made years and years ago, and I'll actually have a video on that upgrade build coming on this channel soon. So if you're interested in picking up a Mars 300 for yourself, there is a link in the description down below where you can go ahead and do that. And if you want to see my upgraded wireless director's monitor build video, make sure to go ahead and subscribe and click that notification bell so you'll be notified as soon as that video is published. Thanks a lot for hanging out, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.